Did you know that Delaware was the first state to join the United States? That it was home to the nation's very first company, even before independence? Or that its coasts hide more shipwrecks than anywhere else in the mid-Atlantic? Delaware is so much more than a tiny dot on the map. It's the origin, the history, and the mystery of America. Get ready, because today you'll discover 35 incredible facts about Delaware that will change the way you see the small state where an entire nation was born. Let's start with number 35, the lowest mean elevation in the USA. You might have bet your bottom dollar that Florida, the state that is essentially a sandbar with theme parks, is the flattest, lowest state in the union. Well, pay up. While Florida is incredibly flat, Delaware actually holds the title for the lowest mean elevation of any US major state, sitting at a remarkably low average of just 60 feet above sea level. To put that in perspective, that is shorter than the average 7-story apartment building, while Florida and Louisiana are tied for second place with a mean elevation of about 100 feet. Delaware hugs the sea level much tighter. This geographical reality defines almost everything about the state's character, from its hydrology to its soil composition. When you are standing in the middle of Sussex County, you are often standing on land that is barely keeping its head above water. This lack of elevation is why the locals are so obsessed with drainage ditches, and why the state's relationship with the ocean is more intimate, and sometimes more perilous, than arguably anywhere else in the country. It is a state that exists entirely on the edge. 34. The 12-mile circle. Now, let's look at a map, because this is one of my absolute favorite geographical oddities in the entire world. If you look at the northern border of Delaware, you will notice it is not a straight line. It is a perfect arc. This is known as the 12-mile circle. It is nominally a circle with a radius of exactly 12 miles centered on the cupola of the courthouse in the town of Newcastle. But here is the secret part that most people miss. Usually when a river forms a border between two states, the boundary line is drawn right down the middle of the main channel, the Thalweg. Not here. Because of a quirky 1682 land grant from the Duke of York to William Penn, the 12-mile circle gives Delaware ownership of the entire Delaware River up to the low tide mark on the New Jersey side. Before continuing, be sure to subscribe and leave a like to keep discovering the strange and incredible geography of our entire country. 33. The Ebright Azimuth Peak. If you are a mountaineer looking for a challenge, Delaware is definitely not your destination. The highest natural point in the state is known as the Ebright Azimuth, located in Newcastle County near the Pennsylvania border. This summit stands at a towering 447.85 feet above sea level. To be honest, calling it a summit is a bit generous. It's basically a speed bump with a sign. What makes this geographically hilarious is where it is located. It isn't in a state park or atop a rocky outcrop. It is literally in the middle of a suburban intersection, Ebright Road and Ramblewood Drive. You can drive your car over the highest point in the state without even downshifting. Unlike the dramatic peaks of the Rockies, or even the rolling Appalachians nearby, Delaware's apex is marked by a simple blue and yellow sign on the sidewalk near a mobile home park. It is the only state high point I know of where the biggest danger is potentially getting a parking ticket rather than altitude sickness. 32. The northernmost natural bald cypress stand. When I traveled through the deep south, I expected to see bald cypress trees. Those majestic, knobby-kneed giants rising out of the swamp water draped in Spanish moss. I did not expect to see them in Delaware, but hidden in the southwestern part of the state, specifically in Trap Pond State Park, lies a geographical anomaly, the northernmost natural stand of bald cypress trees in the United States. Geographically, this shouldn't really be here. These trees are hallmarks of the southern bayous, yet here they are, thriving in the chilly mid-Atlantic waters. This swamp is a remnant of a prehistoric geography when the climate was warmer, and these trees have held on as a biological outpost. Paddling a canoe through Trap Pond feels like a teleportation trick. The dark, tannin-stained water and the towering cypress knees make you feel like you are in the heart of Louisiana, not a few hours' drive from Philadelphia. It is a stunning example of a microclimate creating a geographical pocket that defies the surrounding latitude. 31. The geological wedge. Geopolitics and geometry rarely mix well, and the wedge is the proof. If you look at older maps or examine the exact junction where Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania meet, you'll find a strange wedge-shaped tract of land. This existence is purely due to the geometric difficulty of reconciling the 12-mile circle, which we talked about earlier, with the straight precipice of the Maryland border and the Mason-Dixon line. For a long time, this small triangle of land was a geographical no-man's land claimed by both Pennsylvania and Delaware, and sometimes Maryland. It wasn't officially resolved until 1921. Physically, the wedge is just a suburban area now, but geographically, it represents a mathematical error in the colonial surveys. It highlights how trying to apply perfect Euclidean geometry, like a perfect 12-mile radius, to the messy, rugged reality of the Earth's surface results in weird, orphaned shapes of land. It is one of the few places in the US where a border exists solely because a compass arc didn't quite meet a straight line. 30. The smallest county count. Here's a fact that usually stumps people who are used to states like Texas with its 254 counties or Georgia with its 159. Delaware has the fewest counties of any state in the US. Exactly 3. Newcastle in the north, Kent in the middle, and Sussex in the south. But don't let the low number fool you. These 3 counties represent 3 entirely different geographical worlds. Newcastle is hilly, industrial, and sits on the hard rock of the Piedmont Plateau. Kent is the agricultural heartland, characterized by flat, fertile loam and tidal marshes. Sussex is pure coastal plain, sandy soil, and beaches. Because there are only 3, the county lines essentially act as the major geographical dividers of the state's culture and economy. In Delaware, you don't ask someone which city they are from. You ask which county. It is a simplification of political geography that you just don't see anywhere else in the country. 29. The C&D Canal Island Effect. Technically speaking, the majority of Delaware is located on the Delmarva Peninsula, but here is a mind bender. Thanks to human engineering, the Delmarva Peninsula is geographically an island. The Chesapeake and Delaware C&D Canal, which slices across the northern neck of the peninsula, connects the Delaware River to the Chesapeake Bay. When the government bought the canal and deepened it to sea level, removing the locks in the early 20th century, they effectively severed the land connection between Delaware, Maryland, and the rest of the continent. The canal is 14 miles long and 450 feet wide enough for massive cargo ships. So, when you cross the Summit Bridge or the St. George Bridge heading south, you are technically leaving the North American mainland and entering a massive man-made island that contains 90% of Delaware. It is one of the busiest canals in the world, yet few people realize it transformed the state's geography from a peninsula to an archipelago of sorts. 28. The Fall Line Division. I mentioned earlier that Newcastle County is different, and here is the geological reason why. The Fall Line. This is a major geological boundary that runs right through northern Delaware, specifically Newark and Wilmington. It marks the contact point where the hard, crystalline rocks of the Piedmont Plateau meet the soft, sedimentary deposits of the Atlantic coastal plain. You can actually see this transition if you know where to look. North of the line, the terrain is rolling hills and rocky stream beds, like in Brandywine Creek State Park. South of the line, the ground drops off and becomes instantly flat and sandy. This line determined where the cities were built because it was the furthest point ships could travel upriver before hitting rapids, hence the falls. 27. The Transpeninsular Line. We talked about the northern arc, but the southern border is just as interesting. It is known as the Transpeninsular Line. In the mid-1700s, surveyors were tasked with finding the midpoint of the Delmarva Peninsula to draw a line west to the Chesapeake and east to the Atlantic. This line forms the southern boundary of Delaware, separating it from Maryland. Why is this a cool geographical fact? Because the surveyors marked the eastern end of this line with a stone monument at Fenwick Island that still stands today. This line is one of the oldest geodetic boundaries in America. It literally defines the width of the state. If you visit the Fenwick Island Lighthouse, you are standing near one of the most historically significant distinct lines of latitude in the US. It established that Delaware would not just be a coastal strip, but would have a deep interior relative to the peninsula. 26. The Horseshoe Crab Capital. Geographically, the Delaware Bay is an estuary, a mixing zone of fresh and salt water, but biologically, it is the center of the universe for the Atlantic horseshoe crab. The specific geography of the bay, its shallow, sandy, low-energy beaches protected from the heavy Atlantic surf, makes it the single largest spawning ground for horseshoe crabs in the entire world. Every spring, the bay turns into a prehistoric spectacle. Millions of these living fossils crawl out of the water to lay eggs. This isn't just a bug thing, it's a global geography thing. The eggs provide the essential fuel for the red knot, a bird that migrates from Tierra del Fuego, South America, to the Arctic. The Delaware Bay is the critical gas station in this hemispheric journey. Without this specific estuary geography, the migration of birds across the entire Atlantic flyway would likely collapse. It is a profound example of how a small geographical feature supports a global ecosystem. 25. The Great Walking Dune of Cape Henlopen. You usually associate massive, migrating sand dunes with the Sahara or perhaps the Oregon coast, not the mid-Atlantic. But at Cape Henlopen State Park, there is a geographical beast known as the Great Walking Dune. It stands about 80 feet above sea level, making it the highest sand dune on the Delaware coast. But its height isn't the most interesting part. Its movement is. This dune is a living geographical feature. Driven by the prevailing coastal winds, it has been slowly marching across the landscape for decades. Locals and park rangers will tell you that it moves approximately 3 to 5 feet every year, slowly swallowing the maritime forest in its path. If you hike the trail there, you can actually see the ghost forest, the bleached, skeletal remains of pine trees that were buried by the sand years ago, and are now being exposed again as the dune migrates further inland. It is a stark, real-time demonstration of Aeolian, wind-driven geological processes reshaping the map right under your feet. 24. The shallow lagoon system of the inland bays. Behind the popular beaches of Rehoboth and Dewey lies a massive hydrological system that most tourists gaze at but don't understand. The inland bays. Comprising Rehoboth Bay, Indian River Bay, and Little Assawoman Bay, these aren't traditional deep harbors. They are bar-built estuaries. Geographically, they are incredibly shallow lagoons protected from the Atlantic Ocean by a thin strip of barrier islands. The average depth of these bays is shockingly low, often ranging between just 3 to 8 feet. And in the middle of Rehoboth Bay, miles from shore, an adult can often stand up with the water only reaching their chest. This shallowness creates a unique, fragile ecosystem that flushes out very slowly. 23. The accidental geography of Pea Patch Island, situated in the middle of the Delaware River, is a plot of land that houses the imposing Fort Delaware. It is called Pea Patch Island, and its very existence is a bit of a geographical funny story. According to local lore, which is widely accepted as the origin of the name, the island didn't really exist as usable land until a ship carrying a massive cargo of peas ran aground on a mud bank in the colonial era. The sailors, trying to lighten the ship to float it free, dumped the peas overboard. The peas sprouted in the rich river silt, their roots trapped more sediment, and eventually, a stable island formed from the alluvial deposits. While geologists might say it was just natural silt accumulation on a shoal, the pea origin story highlights how fluid the river geography is. 22. The 9-mile waistline. We talked about how small Delaware is, but there is a specific point that emphasizes its slender nature. In the northern part of the state, roughly near the latitude of Delaware City to the west and the river to the east, the state creates a wasp waist. At its narrowest point, Delaware is only about 9 miles wide. For a traveler, this is mind-boggling. If you were ambitious and in good shape, you could run across the entire width of the state in under an hour and a half. And this narrowness is a result of the Delaware River eating into the coastal plain on the east and the Mason-Dixon line cutting straight down on the west. This lack of strategic depth has always defined the area's infrastructure. Roads and power lines are squeezed into this tight corridor, making it one of the most densely packed utility corridors in the region. It is a geographical bottleneck that you pass through without realizing just how close the borders are on either side of you. 21. The backward flowing Nanticoke River. If you look at a hydrological map of Delaware, you will notice a trend. Almost all the waterways flow eastward, draining into the Delaware River or the Delaware Bay. However, the Nanticoke River is the great geographical rebel. Rising in central southern Delaware, it flows southwest, crossing the border into Maryland and eventually emptying into the Chesapeake Bay. This makes the Nanticoke a part of the Chesapeake watershed, not the Delaware watershed. Geographically, this is significant because the divide between these two massive watersheds is incredibly subtle in the flat coastal plain, sometimes just a rise of a few feet in a cornfield. The Nanticoke is also one of the most pristine, untouched rivers in the mid-Atlantic, often called one of the last great places. Paddling it feels different than the eastern rivers. The current pulls you toward the Chesapeake, connecting this part of Delaware more to the crab culture of Maryland than the industrial river culture of Wilmington. 20. The mystery of the Carolina Bays. Scattered across the landscape of central Delaware, particularly near Blackbird and Red Lion, are strange elliptical depressions in the ground known as Carolina Bays. Despite the name, they aren't unique to the Carolinas. They stretch up the Atlantic seaboard. These are perfect ovals, almost always oriented in a northwest-southeast direction, and they often contain unique seasonal wetlands. The origin of these bays is one of the great geological arguments. Some theories suggested they were caused by a meteor shower or comet fragments hitting the soft Earth eons ago. However, modern consensus leans toward complex wind and wave patterns during the last ice age, shaping existing lakes into these ovals. Standing in one of these bays in Delaware, which might just look like a swampy dip in the woods, you are standing in a prehistoric geographical puzzle that scientists are still debating. 19. The Mason-Dixon Crown Stones. We all know the Mason-Dixon line forms the western and southern borders, but the physical geography of that line is marked by something special. Every 5 miles along the border, the original surveyors, Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon, placed a crown stone. Unlike the intermediate mile markers, which just had an M on one side and a P on the other, these crown stones were elaborate limestone monuments imported from England. They display the coat of arms of the Penn family on the Delaware, Pennsylvania side, and the Calvert family, Lords Baltimore, on the Maryland side. Finding one of these in the wild is like geocaching for history. They have weathered over 250 years of winters, but many still stand in hedgerows and field edges. They serve as a physical reminder that the geography of Delaware was a meticulously calculated royal estate boundary long before it was a state. It transforms a line on a map into a tangible carved piece of limestone history. 18. The National Harbor of Refuge Breakwater. Off the coast of Lewis, in the churning Atlantic where the Delaware Bay meets the ocean, lies a massive geographical modification, the National Harbor of Refuge. This isn't just a jetty, it is a colossal, man-made stone wall built in the 19th and early 20th centuries to create a safe haven for ships during storms. Before this breakwater was built, the geography of the mouth of the bay was treacherous, known as a graveyard for ships. The construction of the breakwater essentially created an artificial lagoon in the open ocean. It is one of the largest stone breakwaters in the world. When you take the Cape May Lewis Ferry, you pass right by it. 17. The Iron Hill Anomaly. In a state defined by sand, silt, and flatness, Iron Hill near Newark stands out, literally and geologically. It is one of the highest points in the state and is part of the Piedmont Formation, but its composition is unique. It consists largely of iron-rich rock, gabbro, that weathers into a distinct reddish clay soil that you don't see in the southern part of the state. This hill is an outlier of the ancient volcanic island arc that formed the Piedmont. Because of its height and composition, it was mined for iron ore starting in the 1700s, fueling the early industrial geography of the region. Hiking up Iron Hill feels like you have left Delaware and stepped into the foothills of Virginia. 16. The Migrating Salt Line. There is a geographical line in the Delaware River that you cannot see, but water managers watch it obsessively. It is called the Salt Line, usually defined by the 250 microarwyl chloride isochlor. This is the fluctuating boundary where the salt water from the ocean meets the fresh water of the river. Because the Delaware River estuary is so long and open, this line moves back and forth with the tides, but more importantly with the seasons and droughts. During dry spells, the salt line creeps north, threatening the freshwater intakes for drinking water in Newcastle County and Philadelphia. During wet seasons, it gets pushed south toward the bay. It is a dynamic, invisible geographical frontier that dictates the water security of millions of people. It turns the river into a battleground between the Atlantic Ocean and the freshwater runoff from the Catskills, right in Delaware's backyard. 15. The rocks of Fort Christina. In Wilmington, on the banks of the Christina River, there is a small geological formation simply known as the rocks. While it doesn't sound impressive, this is the only natural rock outcrop on the lower river. In 1638, when the Swedes arrived to found the colony of New Sweden, they chose this spot specifically because it was a natural wharf, a place where they could step from ship to solid ground without sinking into the tidal muck. Geographically, this outcrop is a protrusion of the Wilmington Complex bedrock. Without this specific tiny geological feature, the first permanent European settlement in the Delaware Valley likely would have been somewhere else. It is a rare instance where a very small geological feature, literally a ledge of rock, determined the location of a capital city and the future history of the state. 14. The vastness of the Bombay Hook mudflats. If you want to see geography that is alive, go to Bombay Hook National Wildlife Refuge at low tide. Here, the geography reveals itself as massive tidal mudflats that stretch for miles along the Delaware Bay. These aren't just dirty beaches. They are vast expanses of nutrient-rich silt that are exposed twice a day. This specific geography is what makes Delaware a global epicenter for bird migration. The mudflats are a dining table for millions of shorebirds. And the consistency of the mud, soft enough for beaks to probe, but stable enough to support the ecosystem, is a result of the unique deposition patterns of the Delaware River. Standing on the observation towers, the horizon blurs. You can't tell where the mud ends and the water begins. It is a landscape that is half land, half water, and completely vital to the Atlantic Flyway. 13. The Burnt Swamp Basin, Great Cypress Swamp. Down in the southwestern corner of Sussex County lies the Great Cypress Swamp, also historically known as the Burnt Swamp. This is the largest contiguous forest in Delaware and the headwaters of the Pocomoke River. Unlike the tidal marshes we just talked about, this is a freshwater wetland basin. The burnt name comes from a massive underground peat fire that burned for months in the 1700s, and again in 1930, literally altering the topography of the swamp by burning away layers of the earth. Geographically, this area is a bowl that collects rainwater, feeding the dark acidic waters of the Pocomoke. 12. The Cretaceous fossil beds of the C&D Canal. We talked earlier about how the C&D Canal turned the peninsula into an island, but geographically, the deep cut of the canal did something even more spectacular. It sliced open a window into the age of dinosaurs. When the Army Corps of Engineers deepened the canal, they cut directly into the Mount Laurel Formation, a geological layer dating back to the Cretaceous period, about 70 million years ago. As a result, the banks of the canal are one of the most accessible fossil beds in the eastern United States. You aren't just finding shark teeth here, you are finding Belemnitella americana, the state fossil. These look like amber-colored bullets, but they are actually the internal skeletons of ancient squid-like creatures. The geography here is a time machine because the canal cut is so deep, creating those massive spoil piles you see from the bridges. It exposes layers that are usually buried hundreds of feet underground. 11. The Indian River Inlet Sand Bypass. If you visit the Indian River Inlet, you will notice a strange industrial crane structure sitting permanently on the south side of the bridge. This isn't for construction, it is a permanent geographical life support system known as the Sand Bypass System. The inlet is stabilized by two massive stone jetties that keep the channel open for boats. However, these jetties interrupt the natural literal drift of sand, which moves from south to north along this coast. Without intervention, the South Beach would grow indefinitely, while the North Beach would starve and erode away into the sea. To fix this geographical crisis, the sand bypass system acts like a heart transplant for the coastline. It literally pumps a slurry of sand and water from the south side, pipes it under the bridge roadway, and sprays it onto the North Beach. It moves approximately 100,000 cubic yards of sand per year. Remember to subscribe and like to keep learning amazing information about each state in our beautiful country. 10. The crunchy beaches of the bay. When people think of Delaware beaches, they think of the soft quartz sand of Rehoboth or Bethany facing the Atlantic. But if you go to the Delaware Bay beaches, like Slaughter Beach, Bowers Beach, or Kitts Hummock, your feet are in for a surprise. Geographically, These are not sand beaches in the traditional sense. They are often shell hash beaches. Because the wave energy in the bay is much lower than the ocean, it doesn't pulverize materials as effectively. Combined with the massive productivity of the estuary's shellfish population, the beaches are composed of thousands of years of crushed oyster, clam, and horseshoe crab shells. Walking barefoot here can be a crunchy and sharp experience. This unique sediment composition changes the way the beach erodes and how it sounds. 9. The Brandywine Blue Rock Geese. If you walk around Wilmington or traverse the fences of the opulent Chateau Country in the Brandywine Valley, you will notice a specific type of building stone, a blue-gray rock that looks incredibly hard. This is Brandywine Blue Gneiss, and it is the geographical bedrock, literally, of northern Delaware. This rock is a high-grade metamorphic rock formed under intense heat and pressure hundreds of millions of years ago. Unlike the soft sedimentary sand of southern Delaware, this is the hard stuff of the Piedmont. It is significant because its presence is the only reason skyscrapers and heavy industry could be built in Wilmington without sinking. It was the preferred building material for the early nation because it was so durable. 8. The Broadkill River's moved mouth. Rivers usually choose where they empty into the sea, but the Broadkill River had its mind changed by humans. Originally, the Broadkill flowed north, parallel to the coast, and emptied into the Delaware Bay near Lewis Creek, miles away from where it ends today. In the early 20th century, the geography was radically altered to improve drainage and navigation. The Roosevelt Inlet was dredged in 1937, cutting a straight line through the dunes and connecting the river directly to the bay much further south. This act of geoengineering decapitated the river, leaving the northern section, now the Canary Creek area, as a strange, truncated waterway. If you look at a map, the river takes a sharp, unnatural 90-degree turn toward the bay at the inlet. 7. The artificial island of Cape Henlopen. We tend to think of Cape Henlopen as a peninsula sticking out into the bay, but technically, since 1916, it has been an island. The construction of the Lewis and Rehoboth Canal connected the Broadkill River in the north to the Rehoboth Bay in the south, severing the Cape's connection to the mainland. While there are bridges to get across, this canal created a distinct geographical separation. It was originally dug to provide a safe inland freight route for barges avoiding the stormy Atlantic, though it never saw much commercial success. Today, it serves as the demarcation line between the mainland and the beach towns. Geographically, this means the resorts of Rehoboth and the wild dunes of the state park are floating on a sliver of land completely surrounded by water, the ocean on the east, the bay on the north, and the canal on the west. 6. The Great Marsh of eastern Sussex. Tucked away north of Lewes and south of Slaughter Beach is a geographical giant that rarely gets the press of the ocean beaches. The Great Marsh. Spanning over 17,000 acres, this is one of the largest contiguous salt marshes in the mid-Atlantic region. From the ground, it looks like endless grass, but from a satellite view, it is a stunning, intricate lace of tidal guts and meandering creeks. This geographical sponge is the unsung hero of the state. It absorbs the massive storm surges from the Delaware Bay, protecting the inland towns from flooding. It is a drowned river valley ecosystem that has been slowly filling with peat for millennia. Navigating it is disorienting because the horizon is perfectly flat in every direction, broken only by the occasional heron or osprey. It represents the raw, primeval geography of the coast before humans started building boardwalks and condos. 5. The White Clay Creek Watershed Anomaly. In the world of conservation geography, rivers are usually protected in segments, a wild and scenic stretch here or there. White Clay Creek in northern Delaware is a geographical celebrity because it was the first time in U.S. history that an entire watershed, rather than just a river corridor, was designated into the National Wild and Scenic River System. This means that the protection extends beyond the banks to the tributaries and the land that drains into them, covering about 107 square miles. Geographically, this is crucial because White Clay Creek is a major drinking water source for Newark and Wilmington. The designation acknowledges that you can't protect a river if you don't protect the geography that feeds it. 4. The Murderkill River's deadly name and tides. You can't talk about Delaware geography without addressing the river with the most metal name on the map, the Murderkill. While the name sounds terrifying, it is actually a geographical linguistic accident. Kill is the Dutch word for river or creek, like Catskill or Skillkill. Murder is likely a corruption of mother, or perhaps muddy, but the geography of the river is intense. It has a massive tidal range and winds through thick, sucking mud that can be dangerous for the unprepared. The river is a tidal conveyor belt, pushing nutrients from the farm fields of Kent County out into the bay. At low tide, the river becomes a muddy trench. At high tide, it is a brimming waterway. 3. The mountains of Cherry Island. In a state where the highest natural point is a sidewalk. Remember the Ebright Azimuth. The most impressive topography is often man-made. Enter the Cherry Island landfill in Wilmington, rising about 60 feet above the confluence of the Delaware and Christina rivers. This is often one of the highest visible points in the coastal plain of northern Delaware. Geographically, this is a marvel of engineering on soft soil, because the ground underneath is river mud, dredge spoil. Building a heavy mountain of trash would normally cause the land to sink or squish out. Engineers had to build a massive reinforced earth berm wall to contain the pressure, creating a geographic vessel for the waste. 2. The recurving spit of Cape Henlopen. If you look at a map of Delaware from 100 years ago and compare it to today, the tip of Cape Henlopen will look different. That is because this is one of the most active geographical features on the East Coast. It is a recurved spit that is constantly growing. Currents sweep sand north along the coast and dump it at the tip of the cape, causing it to advance into the Delaware Bay. Historically, it has grown at rates of up to 10 to 20 feet per year, though it varies. The land at the very tip of the point is the newest geography in the state, land that literally didn't exist when your grandparents were born. This accretion captures the dynamic nature of Delaware. While the ocean tries to wash the state away, the cape fights back, slowly curling inward like a sandy claw trying to grab New Jersey. 1. The estuarine funnel effect. And here we are, the #1 geographical fact that defines Delaware. The entire state's existence is dictated by the funnel shape of the Delaware Bay and estuary. If you look at the map, the bay starts wide at the mouth, between Cape Henlopen and Cape May, and narrows drastically as it goes north toward Philadelphia. This funnel geography creates a resonance effect that amplifies the tides. As the ocean tide rushes into the wide mouth, it gets squeezed into a narrower and narrower channel, forcing the water level higher. This is why the tidal range, the difference between high and low tide, is actually higher upriver near Bombay Hook or Reedy Point than it is at the ocean beaches. This single geographical quirk drives the salt line, the marsh ecology, the shipping industry, and the flooding risks. It turns the entire eastern flank of the state into a massive breathing hydraulic machine. It is the heartbeat of Delaware. After learning these 35 facts about Delaware, tell us, which one did you like the most, or which one surprised you? Leave it in the comments and let's see how many of us picked the same fact. If you think we missed one or want to add something, we'd love to hear from you. Your comments help us make every video even better. And speaking of videos, here's another one on screen so you can keep exploring the geography of our beautiful country. But before you go, don't forget to subscribe and give it a like so we can keep learning together. See you in the next one.